The child. No one wanted. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip across the platform. Heat rolled over the yard like a heavy blanket. Dust clung to skin and clothes, and the wooden boards groaned beneath shifting feet. The little girl stood alone at the center barefoot, and trembling her dress was too big for her thin frame, and her hair fell in uneven strands around her face. She held a small rag doll against her chest, its stitching loose, and its smile long faded. She did not look at the crowd. She looked past them, as if already somewhere else. People gathered in a loose circle. Some whispered, some stared, some pretended not to see her at all. The auctioneer tried again, speaking louder, talking about mercy and second chances, about how a child like this could grow into something useful. His words felt thin and false. The crowd answered with silence. The girl swallowed hard, her shoulders shook, and then she whispered the words, "No one wanted me." They fell into the air and vanished. No one moved. At the edge of the crowd stood a man named Samuel Hart. He was tall, broad, and worn by years of sun, and work his coat was clean, but old his hat pulled low. He had come to town to buy feed and tools, nothing more. He was known for his cattle spread and the quiet way he handled business. He did not like crowds, and he did not like auctions. He told himself to leave. He told himself this was not his fight. He had land and workers and a life already shaped by routine. He did not need complications. He did not need a child. The auctioneer dropped the price again. His voice lost its rhythm. Someone laughed softly. Another man shook his head. A woman turned away. The girl squeezed her doll tighter, her knuckles pale. Samuel felt his chest tighten. The memories surfaced of a winter long ago when he had been a boy alone in a cold house, waiting for someone who never came. He remembered how it felt to be unseen, how silence could hurt more than hunger. Before he could talk himself out of it, his hand rose. His voice came out steady, though his heart was not 20, he said. The sound cut through the heat. Heads turned. The auctioneer froze, then nodded. Quickly. "Sold." He said, "Sold to Mr. Hart." The girl lifted her head slowly. Her eyes met Samuel's for the first time. They were guarded and dark, carrying a weight far too heavy for someone so small. She did not smile. She did not cry. She only watched. Samuel stepped forward. He knelt. So they were level. He spoke softly. "You can come with me. I will not hurt you today." She stared at his hand. Suspicion flickered across her face. She had learned that promises were often traps. Time stretched. Then she placed her small hand, and as her fingers were cold and rough. They walked down from the platform together. The crowd parted. Some watched with curiosity, others with judgment. Samuel kept his gaze forward. "What is your name?" he asked as they reached the ground. After a pause, she whispered, "Clara." The wagon waited at the edge of town. Samuel spread a blanket and helped her climb in. She sat curled into herself, holding the doll and staring at the road. As the wheels turned and town faded behind them, Samuel felt the weight of what had done settle onto his shoulders. He did not know her story. He did not know how to fix what had been broken. He only knew he could not leave her there. Clara watched the sky change colors as they moved farther away. She did not know where they were going. She did not know if this kindness would last, but for the first time, the noise of the auction fell silent behind her. Neither of them spoke as the road stretched on, both carrying fear, both carrying hope, neither yet willing to name it. Samuel drove through the long afternoon sun, the wagon wheels humming against dry earth. Clara sat silent beside him, wrapped in a blanket, like it was armor. She watched everything with careful eyes. The sky, the fences of cattle in distant fields, nothing escaped her notice, but nothing earned her trust either. When they reached the ranch, the light was beginning to soften. The house stood low and wide, built from weathered wood, with a stone chimney smoke curled upward, carrying the smell of food. Samuel stopped the wagon and climbed down slowly so as not to startle her. "This is home," he said, not sure why the word felt strange in his mouth. Clara did not move. She stared at the house like it might disappear or turn dangerous if she believed in it too soon. Samuel did not rush her. He waited, leaning against the wagon, giving her space the way one did with a skittish horse. Finally, she slid down, careful and quiet. Her feet touched the ground, and she flinched when a screen door creaked open. A woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. Her hair was streaked with gray, her posture straight, and her eyes sharp, but kind. Her name was Margaret, and she had run Samuel's household for more than 20 years. She stopped short when she saw the child. "Samuel," she said slowly, "what did you bring home?" "A girl," he answered simply. Margaret looked at Clara, then back at him, taking in the too large dress, the dirt, the way the child stood ready to flee. "I see that," she said, "and I assume there's a story." Later, Samuel said, "For now, she needs food and rest." Margaret nodded once and crouched to Clara's level. "Hello, child." She said, "My name is Margaret. You are safe here." Safe was a word Clara had heard before, usually right before it proved false. She said nothing, but she followed Margaret inside, keeping several steps of distance between them. The house was warm and smelled of bread and stew. Clara paused just inside the door, her eyes darting, taking stock, exits, windows, corners. Samuel recognized the behavior, and it tightened something inside him. Margaret guided her to a wash basin and gently helped her clean up the dirt, came away, revealing bruises. In fading shades, Margaret did not comment, but her jaw tightened. Samuel saw it from across the room. They sat at the table, a bowl placed in front of Clara. She stared at it suspicious. Then she ate quickly, hands moving faster than seemed possible, as if afraid it might vanish. Samuel watched quietly until she gagged and froze. Margaret stepped in smoothly, lifting the bowl enough. She said softly, "There will be more later." Clara waited for anger, for punishment. It did not come. She sat stiff, confused. That night, Samuel prepared a small room near the kitchen, a bed, clean sheets, a lamp. He showed her the door. "You sleep here." He said, "You can leave it open if you want." She did not get into the bed. Instead, when they checked later, she was curled on the floor, beneath it, blanket wrapped tight, eyes open. Samuel felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. The next days passed slowly. Clara spoke little, but she watched everything. She followed Margaret at a distance, copying movements, learning rhythms. She flinched at raised voices and loud sounds. She slept lightly and ate like food was a race she had to win. Samuel gave her space but stayed visible. He worked in the yard and the barn, and she appeared nearby, watching him mend fences or tend cattle. One afternoon, he handed her a nail, and she took it carefully, holding out like an offering. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded as if relieved she had done something right. That evening, as the sun dipped low, she sat on the porch steps, clutching her doll. Samuel sat nearby, not too close. "You don't have to stay if you don't want," he said. "Quietly, you can go inside or anywhere you like." She looked at him finally and whispered, "If I stay, will you send me back?" The question struck deep. Samuel swallowed. "No." He said, "I will not send you back." She studied his face, searching for cracks. Then she nodded once and leaned back against the step. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it was the first time she chose to stay. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch settled into a rhythm. Clara began to understand mornings, started early with the sun. Margaret moved to the kitchen with practiced purpose, and Samuel headed out to the fields. Clara watched it all, quietly learning when it was safe to move and when it was better to be still. She spoke little, but her presence was constant. If Samuel worked in the barn, she sat nearby. If Margaret cooked, she stood at the counter, hands folded, eyes following every motion. She was always listening, always learning the rules of this new world. At night, she still slept beneath the bed, but she no longer shook awake at every sound. Sometimes Samuel would hear her whispering to her doll, words too soft to catch. He did not interrupt. Some things needed to be said in the dark. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast. Dark clouds gathered, and thunder cracked. Without warning, Clara froze, dropping to the ground, arms over her head, breathing sharp and fast. Samuel was beside her in seconds, but he remembered what Margaret had said once about frightened animals and frightened children. He knelt a few feet away. "You are safe," he said evenly. "That noise can't hurt you. The storm will pass." She did not look at him at first. Her body trembled. Then slowly she raised her head and searched his face. The thunder came again, closer this time. She flinched, but did not collapse. "It will end," he repeated. "Storms always do." Later that night, after the rain washed the dust on the land, Clara surprised them both by crawling into the chair beside the fireplace. She did not hide under the bed. She sat wrapped in the blanket, staring into the flames. Margaret caught Samuel's eye and said nothing, but something like hope flickered there. A few days later, a man rode up to the ranch, wearing a badge. His horse stamped impatiently. As he dismounted, Samuel recognized him immediately. Sheriff Thomas, Rita Fair man, but bound by rules that did not always favor the helpless. Samuel met him outside. Margaret lingered near the door. Clara watched from the hallway, her small body half hidden. "I heard you took a child from the auction," Reed said carefully. "I did," Samuel replied. "The institution filed a complaint," Reed continued. "Says the auction was not authorized. They want the child returned." Clara pressed herself tighter against the wall. The word "returned" echoed like a threat. Samuel felt anger rise, but kept his voice calm. "I have papers. I paid legally. She was neglected, abused." Reed sighed. "I don't doubt that, but they have lawyers and authority. This could go to court." "Let it," Samuel said flatly. "I am not sending her back." Reed nodded slowly. I need to see her, make sure she's here and being cared for. Margaret stepped aside. Clara stood, frozen eyes wide. Samuel crouched beside her. You don't have to speak, he said. Just stand with me. She took his hand, gripping it tightly. Reed knelt, lowering his voice. Hello. Clara, you all right here? Clara said nothing. She looked at Samuel, then back at Reed. Her fingers tightened. She eats, sleeps, has a bed, Margaret said sharply, better than she ever had. Reed studied the bruises, still faint on Clara's arms. His jaw tightened. Ill note. Then he said, quietly, then he stood. This won't be the end, Samuel. Be ready. That night, Clara did not sleep. She paced the room until Samuel sat on the floor beside her bed. He said nothing, just stayed. When exhaustion finally claimed her, she curled beside him like a child, anchoring herself to something solid. The next morning, she asked in a small voice, they take me? No, Samuel said firmly, no one is taking you. She searched his face again the way she always did, then she whispered, okay. It was the word she used when she chose to believe, even if only a little. From that day on, she slept on the bed, not under it. She still woke from nightmares, still ate too fast, still watched for danger, but something had shifted. She began to talk more, not stories, just words, names of objects, simple questions. One evening, she asked why you picked me. Samuel thought for a long moment. Because leaving you, there would have broken something in me. She nodded, accepting this answer, as if it made sense. Outside, the land stretched wide and open. Inside, a fragile bond took root. Neither of them knew how hard the coming fight would be, but they were no longer alone in it. The letter arrived on a dry morning, folded crisp. An official. Samuel read it once and again, feeling the weight settle into his chest. Margaret watched his face and knew before he spoke. They want her back, she said quietly. Yes, court hearing in 3 weeks. Clara sat at the table, tracing lines in the wood with her finger. She had learned enough words by now to understand danger. Her shoulders drew in small and tight. Samuel knelt in front of her. No one is taking you without a fight. She did not ask what fight meant. She only nodded, holding her doll close. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Margaret wrote down everything she remembered about Clara's condition when she arrived, the bruises, the fear, the hunger. Samuel rode to town to meet a lawyer named Ellen Price, a sharp woman with steady eyes who listened more than she spoke. You are facing an institution, she said. They have money and authority. You have a heart and a paper trail. We will need proof. Proof of what they did, Clara asked later, that night, sitting on the porch beside Samuel. Proof that they failed you, he answered. She thought about this, then said, I don't like remembering. I know, he said gently, and I will never make you talk unless you want to. The doctor came next, an older man with soft hands, who examined Clara carefully. He spoke in calm tones, explaining everything before he did it. Clara flinched, but she stayed still, gripping Samuel's sleeve. He found old fracture scars, malnutrition. When he finished, he looked at Samuel and shook his head. This was not an accident. He said this was repeated harm. The night before the hearing, Clara had a nightmare. She screamed and thrashed, trapped somewhere. Samuel and Margaret rushed in, but remembered what fear could do. They stayed close without touching until she came back to herself. They come back, she whispered, shaking. No, Samuel said, holding her gaze. They don't. The courthouse loomed tall and cold. When they entered, Clara's hand locked around Samuel's, the other side filled with people in clean clothes, calm faces, rehearsed sympathy. The director of the institution spoke smoothly about care and structure, about troubled children and necessary discipline. She painted Clara as damaged before she ever arrived. Samuel listened, his jaw tight. Then it was his turn. He told the truth, simply, no embellishment. He spoke of the auction, of the silence, of the bruises, of a child who slept under beds and ate like food might be stolen. The judge listened, expression unreadable. Finally, he looked down at Clara. Would you like to speak? Silence fell. Margaret went pale. Samuel squeezed Clara's hand. You don't have to, he whispered. Clara stood anyway. Her legs shook. She climbed down and walked forward alone until she was close enough to be seen. I don't want to go back, she said. Her voice was small but clear. Why? The judge asked gently. Clara swallowed and turned. She lifted the back of her dress just enough. The scar spoke when she could not. Gasps filled the room. The director's face drained of color. The doctor stepped forward, confirming what the marks showed. The judge slammed his gavel hard. This court will investigate immediately. Custody remains with Mr. Hart until further notice. Clara collapsed into Samuel's arms, shaking. He held her tight, feeling her breath slowly steady. Outside the courthouse, the sun felt warmer than it had in weeks. Margaret cried. Without shame, Samuel closed his eyes, grateful beyond words. At home that night, Clara slept through till morning. No nightmares, no screams, just deep, exhausted rest. In the days that followed, the institution was shut down, charges filed, others came forward, stories poured out like floodwater. Clara began to change. She laughed once, startled by the sound. She ran across the field just because she asked if storms always passed. Yes, Samuel said, always. One evening, she sat beside him, watching the sky turn gold. If they didn't hurt me, she asked, would you still pick me? He answered without hesitation, yes. She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. For the first time, she believed that staying was not temporary, that love was not a trick, and that being chosen could mean forever. Years moved forward quietly like seasons changing on the land. Clara grew taller, stronger, her movements no longer cautious. But sure, the ranch became her world, the fences, the horses, the wide skies. Samuel became constant, steady the way the mountains were always there even when storms came. She learned to read sitting at the table with Margaret each evening, sounding out words with careful focus. She learned to ride clinging tight at first, then laughing when fear loosened its grip. She learned that mistakes did not bring pain, only correction, and patience. That lesson took the longest to settle. Some nights the nightmares returned. She would stand in Samuel's doorway, clutching her doll, eyes wide and distant. He never asked questions. He would walk her back, sit, until sleep found her again, and leave the lamp burning low so she would know darkness did not mean danger here. When Clara turned 10, the court finalized everything. She was legally Samuel's child. The paper felt heavy in his hands. But Clara only asked one thing: does this mean I stay even if I mess up? Samuel knelt in front of her. Forever means forever, he said, even on bad days. She nodded, slowly absorbing the truth of it. Then she hugged him fierce, and sudden her arms tight around his neck. It was the first time she had ever done that without fear. At school, she was quiet. Different children whispered sometimes about her scars, about the way she flinched when voices rose. She did not hide the truth. When asked, she answered plainly. Some kids pulled away, others stayed. Those who stayed mattered more. One day a girl asked why she talked about it at all. Clara thought before answering, because if I pretend it didn't happen, then they still win. Samuel heard about it later from a teacher and felt a pride that hurt his chest. As Clara grew older, she found purpose. She helped younger children on the ranch, kids of hired hands who struggled. She sat with them when they cried, spoke softly. When they were scared, she understood fear in a way few adults ever would. At 16, she told Samuel she wanted to work with children like her, not on a ranch, but everywhere. You can be anything, he said. She smiled. I know that's because you chose me. Margaret passed away. Quietly, one winter morning, the house felt emptier after Clara mourned deeply, but openly she spoke at the small service, saying, Grandma chose me. When she didn't have that choice, changed my life. Years later, Samuel grew slower, his hands ached, his steps measured, but Clara was grown now, strong. And sure, she brought her own daughter to the ranch, a small girl with curious eyes and no fear. One evening, that child asked about the old auction receipt framed on the wall. Why is that paper important? Clara answered gently that paper is where my life began again. Samuel watched from his chair, heart full. When he passed, it was peaceful like the land at dusk. Clara stood beside his grave and spoke the truth. He had lived. Love is not a feeling, it is a decision you make again and again, even when it is hard. The program she later built saved thousands. She named it after him, not for honor, but for memory, so no one would forget what one choice could do. And every year she returned to the ranch, stood under the wide sky, and remembered the day a man stepped forward when no one else would. The child no one wanted became someone who changed the world, all because one person chose to care. Time continued its slow, steady walk. Clara carried her work beyond the ranch into towns, cities, places where children waited unseen. She built systems that listened instead of silence, that healed instead of punished. She never forgot what it felt like to stand alone, and unwanted that memory guided every choice she made. The program grew. Families were trained not just to provide shelter, but to give patients safety and consistency. Clara taught them what Samuel had taught her, that healing did not move in straight lines, that fear could return without warning, that love had to be proven daily, not promised once. She spoke softly, but when she spoke, people listened. Her story traveled farther than she ever expected, not because it was tragic, but because it ended in choice. People understood that anyone could look away, but someone had to step forward. Her daughter grew hearing the story not as a tale of pain, but of courage. When she was old enough, she asked, Mama, were you scared back then? Clara smiled. I was scared every day, but I was never alone again. The ranch remained a place of return, a place where seasons turned and memory rested in the soil. Children laughed there. Now many children, some fostered, some adopted, all chosen. On warm evenings, Clara would sit on the porch watching the sky change color. Storm would sit nearby, stitched and worn, still whole, still watching. She believed that objects carried memory, that love could be passed hand to hand, generation to generation. When she grew older and her hair showed silver, she framed the auction receipt beside Samuel's marker on the hill, not as a reminder of pain, but a possibility. Visitors sometimes asked how it all started. Clara always answered the same way someone saw a child as human when the world saw a burden. Her daughter eventually took over the work, carrying the same steady fire, and when asked what inspired it all, she told the story again. The child no one wanted, the man who chose anyway, the life that followed, and somewhere between memory and wind, between earth and sky, the promise held. That love chosen once could echo forever.